Father, Son, and Violin. A personal life story tells the vivid of Mao's China. Daniel Olson Chen. Dedicated to my parents and all of their generation.
Special acknowledgements.
My special thanks to Ms. Mercedes Larbenz. Without her encouragement and inspiration, hard work in editing, artwork and her publishing assistance, this book would never have been made public. Father, Son, and Violin. Chapter 21, A Turning Point in My Life Course. Arriving at Oslo Airport, I was with no luggage, no money, and no idea of what to do or where to go, and of course, no woman. At the restroom I ran into a slim, nice gentleman. Later, I followed him for a coffee. I pretended to happen to pass there. After passing twice he didn't notice me and I had to say hello to him. I made up a story that I was here with my girlfriend to see some friends off. But after our friends were gone we had a little quarrel. My girlfriend simply took the car and went away, and left me here at the airport alone. The gentleman laughed and said that was his exact same story, except his girlfriend didn't take the car. So after he looked around for a while and couldn't find his girlfriend, naturally he invited me to his car.
"Where will you go?"
he asked. Where would I go? That was a really good question. I hesitated a while, then asked him to go to the Oslo Center first. When I arrived at the center, I got out of that nice man's car and realized that although I had lived in Oslo for several years, I really had Northwest friends and no place to go, except the violin shop, Master Crow's place. Crow's violin shop was a 2-story wooden house. The shop was on the first floor and the second floor, a living area. The loft was used as a storeroom for violin making materials and laundry was in the basement. Hearing that Marianne and I got lost during the trip and I lost my key to our home, he didn't know we had no home anymore, Master Crow couldn't help laughing. One thing without doubt, I had to stay in his house for a few days, until Marianne came back to Oslo, if she came back. Master Crow saw my broken white violin and again couldn't help laughing. But his facial expression changed when I told him that it was made by my hands when I was a little boy. Carefully he covered my violin. Jokingly he expressed his hope.
"If you stay here, you will have to be my apprentice to learn how to make violins."
One, enter the gate of violin making. Staying there and eating there, naturally I had to work for Master Crow. On the other hand, I knew according to my father's condition and family situation, the money I had given would definitely not be the last. From then on I had to send money home for sure. The question was only how much and how often. Master Crow naturally took it as an excellent opportunity to train a successor to keep the shop going on. He not only taught me how to repair violins, but also deliberately let me receive customers. But I had a problem, a huge problem, a problem that has not been solved completely, even today. The problem was, no matter if the customer was young or old, I would never miss the chance to show off my violin playing ability. Master Crow, of course, didn't know I did that also for another reason. That reason was, after I lost my Italian violin in the fire, I really felt like I had lost my soul and had no peace in my mind ever. So under that show-off business, I was taking every opportunity to try more violins, hoping to find a violin that I could use, temporarily. Until one day, the most well-known Norwegian violinist visited us. I still didn't give up the opportunity to show off my violin playing. Master Crow had enough. After the guest was gone, he very seriously said to me,
If you want to get into the violin business, the very first quality you need is to forget that you are a violinist. You have to change your position from the front stage starring role to the backstage supporting role. Therefore, you have to become hospitable and humble in front of customers, regardless of the customer's age, gender, or playing ability.
Being hospitable and humble were qualities I lacked in my bones. However, in order not to freeze to death in the 20-degree below zero temperature, I must pretend to be hospitable and humble, at least temporarily, until Marianne came back. Marianne came back to Oslo at last, but without a job or house. What could Marianne do? Of course, we all know Norway is a social welfare country, and we could always go to the government's social office, getting help with a place to live and food to eat, but our pride didn't allow us to do so. We both had good education and high self-esteem. How could we put ourselves together with those losers? After discussion, we agreed that I would go on staying at Master Crow's place and Marianne would stay with her sister for the time being. One more important reason I wanted to stay at Master Crow's place was, I couldn't find a violin to replace mine after having tried so many violins at his shop, so I was growing an idea to make a violin by myself, for myself, again, after a few decades. If I could make a violin when I was a kid, why not now? I formally accepted Master Crow's offer to be his apprentice. I told Master Crow that in order to learn better, I'd rather continue staying in the small room at his house instead going back to my comfortable home. Master Crow was of course very pleased to hear that, though he guessed I must have had a quarrel with my woman. His attitude towards me suddenly hardened, saying that if I really wanted to learn, I had to listen to everything he told me. For the sake of making a violin for myself, as well as that small bed and food every day, I promised positively. Early next morning, Master Crow woke me up. He took me to the loft selecting wood from piles of materials. He was very careful and serious, which made me a little impatient, saying,
They all look the same to me.
Master Crow told me,
Every piece of wood is different from the other, just like humans. First, we must find the best top and back materials, and then we need to make a good match of them. For just like humans, to put a good man and a good woman together does not guarantee a good couple. Therefore, to choose good material and make a good match is the first step, the very basic and most vitally important step for making a good violin. For this reason, there is never too much time spent on it.
He turned his back to me, got himself in the piles of wood, knocked each piece of the wood, made some marks on each piece, doing that repeatedly over and over again. I thought what he said was reasonable and convincing, so I pretended to be patient with my face. When I started to do the looking and knocking on the wood, I started to notice some differences in the sound pitch, tone, color, and vibration of each piece. In this way, I unconsciously got myself into the selecting wood business, seriously, curiously, and energetically. Looking at me being fascinated by what I was doing, Master Crow seemed to be impressed and said,
That is more likely going to make good violins.
I took 5 sets of materials that Master Crow had chosen for me to the violin-making workshop. My violin-making career started from there, professionally. When I tried to make the first violin, I sawed the wood in a violin shape too harshly, so that too much wood had been taken. That meant the top, which could have been a beautiful violin a few minutes ago, was now just a pile of firewood. On my second try I was very careful, but again made a mistake on cutting the F-holes. The top wood simply cracked. That was a waste of 1 top wood and 2 weeks' effort. The failure of 2 told me I must not be anxious, I must be very careful and patient with every single sawing and cutting. On my third try, I worked as carefully as I could. 3 weeks passed, a nice-looking white violin was born. I was extremely excited when I looked at the white violin hanging on the wall with the memory of making my first violin when I was a little kid under the instruction of Master Zhou. I could feel the pain of my injured hand years ago. The same problem with my quick-tempered nature arose when putting on the varnish. I didn't wait for the first layer to dry. I put on the second layer, resulting in the varnish wrinkling, so that I had to wash both layers of varnish away with alcohol and start over. At last, when the varnish was done, again being impatient, I didn't wait long enough for the varnish to dry thoroughly and rushed to put the parts on for a sound test. This left a few fingerprints on the violin, permanently. The series of failures all told me a simple fact: everything had to be done step by step, carefully, with skill, following its natural course. A single careless move of the knife or brush could spoil the whole thing. My pride did not allow me to fail at what I was trying to achieve. I worked much harder and much more carefully. In the end, I reached my goal successfully, with the fifth violin. I confirmed that the varnish had dried thoroughly. Nervously I put on strings. When my bow touched the strings it made the first cry. I was extremely excited, the feeling very much like the first time being a father. About a week later a chance came to me. In Norway we had a very young and talented violinist named Jochen. His violin broke just before his big concert with the Oslo Philharmonic. When he brought his violin visiting our shop, he saw my new violin on the table. He played it and liked it, borrowing it for a few days, then longer than a few days, then he played my violin at the concert instead of his own. And then he came with his mama to our shop asking,
How much?
Before I even had a chance to say, it's negotiable. Master Crow answered, 36,000 kronor plus consumption tax. That number was far beyond my expectation. 36,000 kroner equals $6,000. Was my violin really worth that much money? But Master Crow was serious. When the payment was due, Master Crow took a 10% materials fee and 30% for tools, parts, working space, and a small profit. The rest, 60%, was mine. Like that, I tasted the sweetness of violin making and concretely touched the charm of money. Sometime later, Jochen played Paganini's concerto with the Norwegian National Symphony Orchestra in Oslo Concert Hall live on NRK, the state television station. Following that, my name as a violin-making master was also in the Oslo newspaper and it looked like I was on track to be rich and famous. As time went by, I was more and more recognized and talked about as a violin maker, while on the other hand, I, Daniel Chen, as a violinist, was gradually forgotten. For me, it was a hard process to transfer my self-identity from player to maker. But one thing was really true. During the process I found violin making more and more interesting and more aspects and things to learn or study. In addition, violin making helped me a lot with my academic studies of violin acoustics. By the way, I never forgot my promise of getting Ma Xiaomao out of China. As a matter of fact, as soon as I got back on my feet, I put some ads in the Oslo local newspaper looking for a spouse for her. In less than a week I received a dozen letters. I removed all the too old and too young, too handsome and too ugly, too capable and disabled, leaving 2 gentlemen, one fat and the other skinny. I sent the photos of the 2 candidates to Ma. It was up to her to take meat or bone. Master Crow's story. Although Marianne and I met often, we didn't live together. That didn't cause much of a husband and wife crisis as we didn't have much intimacy when we were together. One night, as often happened, I had what the Chinese call a spring dream, to have sex with someone in a dream. It was just at a very good moment when suddenly I was awakened by shouting. It was Master Crow's voice from the next room. Not knowing what happened, I quickly ran out and pushed his door to open. I turned on the light to find Master Crow, on the floor, breathing heavily. Before I tried to help him, he got up and apologized.
I'm sorry to wake you up. I just had a bad dream.
It's all right. I was having a dream too.
I said, but couldn't tell him that I was in the middle of a very good moment. Once awake, I couldn't get back to sleep so easily, so I went to the kitchen and got myself a cup of hot milk with cocoa. Again, in the middle of my enjoyment, Master Crow came and also sat at the dining table, having a cup of heavy black coffee. Nothing to do, he started to talk about what happened in his nightmare. In the nightmare, his adopted son and daughter in Hong Kong were in danger. He was trying to rescue them desperately. But no matter how hard he hit the accelerator pedal of his Mercedes-Benz, the car simply would not move. Then he had to get out of the car and run, but his legs couldn't move. Then he fell off the bed. That's about the story. Master Crow finished his story. Spontaneously, he asked me about my family. Not only would my family story be too complicated to tell and to understand, but also I didn't feel like talking about my private affairs, for it really hurt. Therefore I told him a made-up story, saying that I was adopted when I was very little from China to Australia. After having heard my story and thinking I was an orphan, Master Crow probably felt it was God who had brought us together. He looked to be deeply moved and started to tell me his family history. Master Crow was a German, born to a violin-making family in East Germany. When he was about 10 years old, World War II started. One day he came home with his dog, and found his home razed to the ground after an air raid. He lost everyone in his family except Mary, the dog. Then the little boy Crow, together with his dog, followed a neighbor, Hans, escaping to Norway. A few years later, after they had settled down in Norway, Hans returned to his homeland. Soon Hans sent Master Crow a letter. In the letter, Hans said he went to see Master Crow's old house site. The new house owner told Hans that they had found a lot of violins, bows, and violin-making tools as well as materials in the cellar. The new house owner thought someday the old house owner might come back for those things, therefore he kept everything as carefully as possible for all those years. Hearing that news, young Crow, for the first time and the last time too, returned home to collect all the violin property that his family had inherited from their ancestors for generations. Back to Norway, Master Crow followed in the family's footsteps and opened a violin workshop in Oslo. Here I need to insert a side story, the story of Master Crow's only family member, Mary, the dog. After the air raid, Mary was the only family member who survived. They had been together since and never parted. But just before Master Crow was about to go back to his homeland Germany, Mary went out by herself for some time every day, and when she came back, her feet were always dirty with mud. Master Crow thought Mary was out looking for a boyfriend, therefore he was happy and didn't pay much attention. But one day, out of curiosity, Master Crow followed the dog to a hillside area. Crow discovered that Mary was digging a small cave with her paws. Master Crow thought that it must be some kind of dog game, so didn't care much. On the day he went back to his motherland, or should I say fatherland, Mary, for the first time in her life, refused to follow her master, even when dragged by force. Master Crow thought it was only a matter of 3 or 4 days, so he left the dog home. Crow left enough food and water for Mary. Of course, Crow never expected that this time apart from Mary was to be forever. When Crow returned back to Oslo from Germany, Mary wasn't at home. Looking everywhere possible, he couldn't find her. Finally, Crow went to that little hill and found the dying Mary in that self-made, small cave. When Crow cried for Mary, she responded with a very weak and small, snail move. Crow suddenly realized Mary was over 15 years of age and it was her time to go to heaven. But what made Crow feel even more sad was that when Mary knew she was going to die, she dug herself a small cave to end her life there, quietly, in order to save her master from the sadness of seeing her body. Crow took some soil and with both hands, mixed the soil with tears, blocking the last little air hole of the cave, so Mary could have less pain before going to meet God. Alone back home, Master Crow immediately wrote a letter to his girlfriend Margaret. In the letter he again and again begged Margaret for forgiveness, as in less than 20 years of his life he had twice lost his loved ones. Therefore, in order not to lose any family, the only way was not to make family. Just like that, Master Crow, with all the violins, tools, and materials inherited from his family and photos of Mary hanging on the walls, lived all by himself for a few decades, until the time he met me and he was just over 65, a time to think of retirement.
Until this age, I began to regret from time to time. I sometimes think, to have a family, have people to love and to worry about, is the true happiness of life.
It was because of that kind of loneliness and the need to be needed. Through the Norwegian church he got in touch with a church in Hong Kong, adopting 2 orphans, a brother and sister there, and financially supported them. After his life story, Master Crow finally suggested I make peace with Marianne and move back with her as soon as possible, to have some children, the sooner the better. Three, in the West, family above all. As Master Crow said not once.
Although you are smart, get started very quickly. If you really want to take the violin shop, your skill and ability is far away from enough. So I think you'd better talk to your wife and go learn some hard skills in other European countries before I am too old to look after the shop.
Although I wasn't too sure I wanted to take Crow's violin shop, with the thought that it might help my violin playing and violin acoustic studies, and in addition, as Master Crow suggested, I should move back with Marianne, he didn't know we had no place to stay. I decided to go to some other European countries to learn some skills and knowledge of violin making. I first went to Hungary's Liszt Academy of Music, taking part in the stringed instrument making section. During my study period at the Liszt Academy of Music in Budapest, Hungary, my instructor of violin making was Irag from the former Soviet Union, and my instructor of bow making was Etzler from Germany. Although they were from completely different countries and cultures, they shared the same quality, which was that they both loved their families above all else. Master Irag had obviously moved from the former Soviet Union to Hungary to escape the poverty. As his wife and children were still back home, Irag was making every effort to bring his family to Hungary. Therefore at work, other than violins, I heard the most from him about his family. Master Etzler, too, was talking about his pregnant wife very often. Sometimes when he received a phone call from his wife, he would put down all his work and run back home. I remember once, a customer was about to buy his bow after trying it for 2 hours, but Master Etzler was constantly checking his watch. As soon as it reached 7 p.m., Master Etzler stopped the customer from trying more and said he must go back to see his wife. That left the customer and I dreadfully puzzled. The next day I asked him why he did that. He answered,
"Yesterday, I made an appointment with my wife at a restaurant at 7:30 p.m.
That answer made me even more puzzled. Then he explained,
"I work for money to make my wife happy. If my wife is unhappy, money is useless and work is meaningless."
In Western culture, family is regarded as the smallest component of society, therefore the stability of a society has to be based on the stability of the families. Because of this, the social system, whether cultural, legal or religious, all regard family as the most sacred. For example, if someone immigrates to Europe or America, his family would legally immigrate with him after a certain period of time. Even for overseas students, their spouses and children could automatically go where the father or mother is later. In the West, even insurance companies offer discounts to those who have a stable family. In the United States and other Western movies, all are filled with the family above all value. In the Western Church, people address each other as brothers and sisters, filled with a family-like atmosphere and love. In fact, family above all may not only be a common social value in Western culture, but also among all human beings, even among most of the animals. Yet that was not true in China from the 1950s to 1980s, for in this period, Chairman Mao and the Communist Party were above anything and everything. Next to Mao and the party would be the so-called people and work. Family was at the lowest status in Chinese society during that period of time. According to my personal experiences, my first wife Dongya was from Shanghai and I was from Hunan. We met in Shanghai during my time at university and married in Shanghai, but after I graduated from school I had to go back to where I originally came from. Therefore we never actually lived together as husband and wife right up until our divorce. In other words, we were just a paper couple. In China, a separated couple is called the Mandarin Duck, and Dongya and I were among the millions. Speaking of family being the basic unit and foundation of social stability, I know of many stories that would explain China's instability at that time. It was in the 90s that I went to Guangzhou. There I met a 17-year-old prostitute. I asked her why she didn't want to go home. She told me that she simply had no home to go to. She was the eldest daughter of the family, with father and a remote mother seldom at home. After her father's death, the 3 kids never heard from their remote mother again. She first wanted to work as a prostitute to help her younger sister and brother. But after being caught by the police for a week, she went back home and found her sister and brother were gone. Without family members, the home was no longer a home. I thought at that time, if more families are like this, how could the society be stable? Why was my mind so unstable? Because I was away from my family. After Hungary, I went to more countries and met more violin-making masters, Cremona in Italy, Mittenwald in Germany, as well as Paris, Moscow, and short courses at 2 universities in the United States. It was at the violin repair and restoration course at Oberlin College that I restored the white violin I had made when I was a kid, which my father had smashed to pieces during the Chinese Cultural Revolution. When my classmates asked me,
"How come this naked thing
they didn't even bother to call it a violin.
is broken like this? How could it happen?"
I hesitated to tell and could only put my pharynx to the bottom of my stomach. The story of that ragged violin was beyond human imagination, and only people who had gone through that period of history in China would understand. After 1 month of hard work, I finally put all the pieces back in shape, the shape of a violin again. When I made some sound out of my dear, naked violin after so many years, I found that it was the most beautiful and exciting violin sound in the world, though most of my classmates were making gestures to cover their ears and scoffing at me. I was very happy. At the moment, the happiest man in the world. Through the violin-making process I became acquainted with many violin-making colleagues. Now I can call them my colleagues. By working together with them, I noticed very different qualities from myself as a player. Unlike the players, snobby, show-offs, pretentious, they were simple, humble, down to earth, and most of them valued their family more than anything else. They also helped me discover the interest, charm, and challenge of the violin as an instrument itself, and more I got myself into the profound art of violin making. 4. Part from Marianne. After I was re-educated by Western values, family above all, I felt I should do something for my family that I had formed with Marianne in Norway. After returning back to Oslo from a studying trip in other parts of the world, I began to look for a house and talk to banks about loans. I wanted to give Marianne a surprise. Yet Marianne was quite upset when she found out what I was trying to do.
How many times do I have to tell you that when you do things you should consult with me?
I wanted to give you a surprise.
I explained.
Surprise? Indeed. I am surprised, congratulations. But I'd rather you tell me the date we go to Eastman or Indiana University than having been surprised by this.
Marianne said.
About Eastman or Indiana University, I think I won't go there for some time, or never, because I grew up quite much recently. Being realistic, we're at the age to plan our lives, to settle down, have children. I mean, just like everybody else, to be normal people having a normal life.
I explained.
Normal? If you're normal, why should I waste my life on you? I thought you were something special, because you have your dream.
Marianne reasoned.
But my dream may be too far away from me, and I might never reach it in our lifetime.
I took the speech over.
A man with a dream that can't be achieved is far better than a man without. I don't have as much talent as you do, so I can only be a scholar to study and research the achievements of others. But you have a gift and you should pursue and create your own art. If I were you, I would rather die in the middle of pursuing my goal than become an aimlessness mediocre.
Maybe not Marianne's original words, but it's what she meant.
What did you say? I'm mediocre.
I felt greatly insulted.
What else do you expect me to call you? If you don't play violin, you aren't you anymore. Look at you, degenerated into a mercenary small business. I don't know such a person, or I really don't want to know such a person, not anymore.
That's about it, the last words from Marianne to me that I can remember, and would never forget. I knew it was useless to argue with her any further, because it wouldn't have any result. There was only one thing I didn't want to admit: I am not mediocre. Or as Marianne said, I had become mediocre, which really meant my mind was changing to be more pure and noble. Marianne really wasn't the kind of woman who would be satisfied with a peaceful, stable, ordinary life. She needed to continue looking for what God was asking her to do in life. She needed to find more truth of life, of the relationship between body and soul. About our relationship, Marianne described it like this.
We were fated to meet each other, as it was originally arranged by God, for that I have nothing to regret. But after we met, we didn't go parallel, therefore I have no choice but to go on towards a different direction. It's like two lines from different directions meeting together, but then part again, each for its own course.
With my strong will, we bought a new apartment. Although we lived together under the same roof for a while, we felt far apart from each other. Not to mention having children, as we didn't even bother doing things to make children. In reality, husband and wife remained only a formality. Therefore, from sometimes to very often, I still stayed at Master Crow's place. The relationship crisis with Marianne made me think that without her I would be alone, helpless in Norway. That made Master Crow closer and more important to me. In order to please my master, I purposely wrote to my friend in Hong Kong, asking him to take care of the two adopted children of Crows. My friend wasn't really happy to do so, but on my face, he reluctantly went to see the two children. The result was ugly, as the brother and sister in the photo I gave to my Hong Kong friend were not orphans, but children of a social worker for a charity organization. What made things even worse was that the two kids didn't even know about the existence of their Norwegian papa, Master Crow, who had been sending money to them every month for more than 10 years. I hesitated for some time, wondering if it was right to tell him the truth, as I was so afraid the truth would shock my master to death. But he didn't. In fact, he had guessed because the letters he received from the children were all too good to truly be written by children of their age. But Master Crow would rather believe everything was true than investigate. To put it this way, he was doing it more for his own need than that of others. Besides, after so many years, the photos of the children growing up had gradually become a part of his life, if not the only part of his life. Again, a good intention had led to a bad result. I meant to help him but resulted in hurting him. Although Master Crow didn't blame me in words, the atmosphere and mood between us was never the same. That was one of the reasons I was forced to rethink my life in the future. Master Crow's personal life, again, taught me that family was vitally important, more so than anything else. Therefore I started to think, if by going to Indiana University I could save my relationship with Marianne, I should do it. Not for the sake of my life's dream and pursuing my music education after the Shanghai Conservatory of Music, but this time, for the sake of keeping our family going, the only family I had in Norway. Although by going to the United States I most probably wouldn't be able to support my sick father back home, wasn't it true that I had my own life? Could I really let him control my life, especially after his saying, I dislike Danjo by nature? Why didn't father like me? By nature. Why should I change my life for such a father? Was he really worth my effort and the sacrifices I was making? On top of it all, I had already done my best, once and for all. Master Crow learned that I had changed my mind about taking over his shop, instead going to the US. He said nothing. With a gloomy face he silently gazed at the photos of Mary, his dog, on the wall, for a long, long time. While I was busy preparing for the United States, Master Crow was also busy with something. He appeared to be taking things out of his bedroom to his car and driving somewhere, repeatedly. Since both of us were busy, we simply closed the shop for a week. One night, I was awoken by some noise. It sounded as if he were moving things out again. The next morning, at the breakfast table, he suddenly asked me how much money I had saved for the United States. I told him about $20,000. Master Crow smiled a little, mysteriously. After breakfast, he told me that he was going somewhere for a while and asked me not to worry about him. It sounded rather casual, so I didn't think too much about it. Soon after, he went outside to his car, waved his hat towards his shop and me, and was gone. That was the last sight I had of Master Crow. The same day, Master Crow's accountant came to see me. He passed me a letter from Crow. In the letter there were 3 things written. 1. He sold all his property to me, his house, violin shop and everything inside, violins, bows, tools, materials, all things and everything, for the price of $20,000, requiring a cash payment, immediately. 2. To keep it a secret between the 3 of us as long as he was alive. 3. He has chosen a good place to spend the rest of his life. He appreciated our respecting his choice and we promise him never to try to look for him. Master Crow's accountant said he had no idea why Crow would sell his millions of krone worth of property to me for the ridiculous price of $20,000. He only knew that by doing so, it would ease the procedure and save all the trouble of non-relative inheritance legal issues and problems. What puzzled the accountant more was why Master Crow would need $20,000 in cash immediately, as in Norway, a high welfare country, the elderly people have an absolute guarantee for their living expenses. Being extremely honest, the temptation of paying $20,000 cash to get a property worth millions, right then and there, was tremendously high and hard to resist. After a few days' hesitation, I decided to leave this matter to my Marianne. I passed the money to her and said,
For the sake of our family, it's all up to you to decide.
Marianne didn't take the money, instead she kissed me. After a considerably long period of time she did that. I couldn't even remember when the last one was, and said,
Do as we planned. You go first, I'll stay and find someone to rent our apartment to pay for the loan and come after you.
So, the thing was set. I told Master Crow's accountant our decision and handed the keys of Crow's house to him. Of course, to this poor accountant, these were the oddest things he had witnessed in his entire life and he could never understand. Just when I was about to order my plane ticket to Indiana, a family letter from China reached me, again. This letter was written by my brother Danson. In the letter, besides some family affairs, he mainly told me that our younger brother Danhen had gotten divorced. After the divorce, Danhen decided to quit his job in acrobatics and work as a cook in a Chinese restaurant as he had always wanted. That meant that for quite some time, Danhen was unable to give father sufficient financial support. By the way, some years later Danhen became a very good chef in a nice restaurant in London. Put in one word, my family back in China count on me for money. Suddenly the scene of father lying in a steel wire net bed in the corridor of a hospital came to my eyes. That tragic image was so strong and so impactful that all my resentment of father was temporarily blurred. On the surface, it was such a simple family letter that changed my entire direction in life. However, from the inside, it was a very complex and difficult process. Think about it, the world-leading violinist Kyunghwa Chung's heartfelt advice didn't change me from pursuing a violin-playing career. Master Crow's life, hope and property didn't change me from pursuing a violin-playing career, but finally, it was the image of father lying in a steel wire net bed in the corridor of a hospital that changed me from pursuing a violin-playing career and woke me up from the dream of becoming a world-class violinist, to live in a realistic world of making everyday money. I went back to Master Crow's accountant, put the $20,000 cash on the table and asked for the keys in exchange. Of course I did it all by myself, alone, without consulting Marianne. I thought if she wanted her kiss back, I had to kiss her. The next day, my shop, Daniel Violins, was open for business. All my American dreams, my career as a violin soloist, became history. For years with Marianne also ended there. She left me, for a reason not difficult to understand, especially since it was not at the time when I was poor, but on the contrary, when I started to make money. But Marianne certainly didn't think the same way most people would. To her, she left me because I had become poorer and poorer in spirit. There were, of course, other crises in our relationship apart from that. I was far away from the country I came from, alone in a foreign land, living a solitary life like an ascetic monk, for as long as another 4 years. From a violin player to a violin maker. I have the kind of character, or quality that is, no matter what I do, I take it very seriously and professionally. I also apply this to my violin making, of course. Since I took over the violin shop, gradually and continuously, one by one, I had made over 100 violins. Under the encouragement of one telephone call from Master Crow, I sent 2 violins and a viola for the 1993 International Violin Making Competition. The results were promising. Both of the violins went to the final and the viola had gained a certificate of diploma. From then, I began to be in the newspapers from time to time, on the radio or television. The strange thing was, all that didn't make me feel fulfilled. It was probably due to 2 reasons. First of all, this good was my violin making, rather than violin playing that I had struggled to achieve for many years. The second reason may be far more important than the first reason. That was that violin making made me walk out on the world of four strings, from the art of violin playing, the small micro-world in the ivory tower, to see and live in the immense, vast world outside. For instance, the word make, let's take a look what others have been making. Throughout history, people have made the Grand Canal at Babylon, the pyramids, the Great Wall. Today, people make cars running on the road, or vehicles flying in the sky, or even out into the universe. All modern civilizations have made cities. In the cities we have various buildings, gardens, computers, etc. In short, just take a look around us. Is there anything that is not made by people other than me? But what have I made? A violin, which is precisely a wooden box that can make a musical sound. What is a violin to the society as a whole? To put it nicely, I'm a violin-making artist. Speaking in reality, I'm no more than a small carpenter or a craftsman. To make it simpler, after my identity shift to violin maker, I started to realize my real position and weight in society. Moreover, because the heavy burden as a violinist had been lifted, I gradually lost my desire to show off in front of others, becoming simpler, humbler. With a broader view of the world, I gradually became aware that the whole vast music world I had been intoxicated within for the last 20 years, itself, was just a very small part of human society. The sacred and noble music was, after all, entertainment. The more I learned, the more I realized that apart from my 4 violin strings, I really knew very little about the outside world. Since being yanked out of that fantasy art world, I needed to learn how to live in the real world, from scratch. I had to learn many basic skills and a lot more about real life. Gradually, I had a new vision of life. I should not, like in the past, take the violin as the purpose of my life, but take learning violin making as a means of learning other things, to go on seeking and finding some new life content and lifestyles, to enjoy life in its various flavors. In short, the violin business brought me to another world. I had the chance to meet many different people and see new things. With no woman around me, and especially no longer needing to practice the violin for hours each day, I suddenly felt I had a lot of free time. To pass the time, I read a lot of books, rented many videos, and participated in social activities as much as I could. For example, on Sunday morning I would surely go to church. By that, little by little, I came to believe in the existence of God. That rationale change made me start to think about the true meaning of life. Gradually I became aware of how ignorant and selfish I was. At the same time, I more and more appreciated the importance of family and realized I was lacking the most important qualities of human nature: love, forgiveness, tolerance, humility, virtue, and so on. I started to dislike myself and felt obliged to relearn how to behave in society. Through a cycle of self-criticism and re-education, I had the feeling that it was God who sent my father to block my way on a continuing slide down towards the abyss of the narrow violin world. One thing I must make clear is that when I said I don't play violin anymore, I didn't mean I no longer touch the violin at all. I only gave up my life's goal of being a professional violin virtuoso. In reality, when I had time, I would always play for enjoyment. There is one more side story worth mentioning before I end the chapter. One day, an elderly lady named Christiana Olsen came to my shop with an old violin. She passed the violin over to me, which had been with her all her life, together with her touching life story. Lady Christiana's violin and her life story aroused my interest in replaying the violin. Miss Christiana Olsen's story, I wrote a book about. The Violin Lady, written in Chinese, was published in Taiwan. Later, I spent 3 months at the film school of USC, Hollywood, writing a movie script in English, titled The Christiana's Violin. Of course, this time, the so-called replaying of the violin was not to be used as a profession, but as a hobby, so I didn't have much psychological stress and burden. I felt relaxed and happy, as playing the violin was no longer for fame, but simply the expression of music and the love of life. I invited my old partner, pianist Miss Danden, to Norway. Together we made a CD of my favorite classical violin pieces. Following that, I worked with a Norwegian pop violinist, Leslie Eggerer, and made a CD of some popular songs. We have been music partners since, and 18 years later, Leslie became a Hollywood music star and I share the honor with him. I could feel that I had changed, become cheerful, humble, and even began actively contacting my family in China, especially after I lost my own Norwegian family with Marianne. The family in China was the only one I had. Finally, I would like to mention Master Crow. In the beginning he made calls to me, as he never told me his number. Gradually, the phone calls became less and less frequent, until there were none. I quite often imagined how my Master Crow would end his life. Like his beloved Mary in an unknown cave.